Welcome back to Face the Nation. For more context on some of the online discourse that fueled the assault on the Capitol, we want to go now to the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Chris Krebs. Good to have you back with us.
Hey, good morning, Margaret.
The Wall Street Journal has reported that the FBI and Homeland Security never issued a threat assessment to local law enforcement here in D.C. about what happened on Wednesday ahead of time. Given that there were explicit online conversations about storming the Capitol, how is it possible that this was not a known threat?
So, I'm sure that the ensuing investigation will get to the bottom of what happened. I think to a certain extent, we may have had some negative learning from the summer's protests and riots. And maybe there was an overreaction in the wrong way that led to some of the breakdowns here. But again, there's an investigation. But to be clear, we, at least when I was there, we certainly anticipated physical violence as the ultimate manifestation of the president and the campaigns and his attorneys and his supporters claims that the election was rigged or stolen. And, those claims continue. The latest dog whistle is election irregularities. Mm-hmm. So those that are promoting these, this narrative, these conspiracies, have to stop. They have to denounce these claims.
I mean, Homeland Security warned back in October that right-wing groups may use political rallies, and they actually pose a direct threat in terms of action. But then during the Black Lives Matter protests this summer, the Homeland Security Secretary was on this program and others touting the fact that the federal government could put federal agents in cities, whether mayors or governors wanted them there or not, that they had the power to do more. So, why not do more if within the agency there were the threats that you just highlighted? Whose fault is that?
Again, the investigations, we'll get down to it, and particularly in the District of Columbia, the federal authorities on federal land, like the National Mall, like the Capitol grounds, have even greater authorities than they would in any American city. So clearly there was some sort of coordination and pre-planning breakdown. What I would be thinking about right now is what happens on the 20th. Mm-hmm. What are the protections that are going to be in place? But there is an opportunity here, I think, to prevent further bloodshed. And I don't know if the president's capable of doing it, but he has to resign. He has to tell his supporters that he lied to them, that this was all his own fraud. He has to come out. We have to set an example for the rest of the free world that attempted coups, which is what this was, will not be tolerated. And there has to be an accountability. So whether it's a 25th Amendment push, whether it's an impeachment, the president needs to be held accountable for supporting and really inciting the activity of this past week.
And our reporting shows that he has no intention to do that, to resign. We know, though, that he does plan, and our CBS News team is reporting he does plan to speak tomorrow, but we're told it's going to be to blast big tech for decisions like what Twitter just did to ban him. We also know Apple, Amazon, Google, they have blocked the Parler app, which has also been used as a forum to plan these kind of events. What is the impact of that?
Well, look, I think at this point, particularly after Wednesday, the president's legacy is a heap of ashes. There's nothing redeemable at this point, given the fact that he incited this attempt to overturn democracy, a fair and free election. There is an opportunity, though, for a redemption story. Again, he can resign. He can tell his supporters that it was all a big con and that he is sorry. I don't know if he's capable of doing it, but that's the best way to prevent further violence, to prevent further erosion of confidence in democracy over the next 4 years. And every single Republican on the Hill that continues to support these election irregularities has to do the same thing. They have to denounce it, and they have to come back to the middle.
And yet, on the issue of cyber and social media, which you've spent a lot of time thinking about, a lot of conservatives are speaking out, not against the president and his use of it, but against the idea that Twitter is censoring somehow conservative thought. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who is likely to run in 2024, is out there tweeting this is un-American and a tactic of the left. Is this a free speech issue?
No, the First Amendment doesn't apply to private sector organizations. That's not how this works. That's government impeding speech and the ability to hear, and that's not what's happening here. These are companies that have their own ability to enforce their standards and their policies. I think there was a legitimate public policy interest over the last 4+ years of maintaining the president and his voice on Twitter and other platforms. But clearly, what he has done has exceeded any reasonable public policy interest. Now, the hard part is implementing these standards globally consistently. Other foreign leaders, for instance, they need to be consistent. They need to probably take similar action.
Understood. Chris Krebs, thank you for your time. We asked senior national correspondent Bob Schieffer to take a look at reaction to the Mark Strassmann to take a look at events around the country. Here's his report.
Vengeance is ours, saith the mob. And they're still saying.
I'm really glad it needed to happen.
Days after MAGA mania rampaged through an American sanctuary. Was the moment heroic or horrific? Partisans got in each other's face.
We all got to terrorists. No, we're not.
But for some Trump loyalists, it's an inflection point.
You can be disappointed in whatever, but you can't just go in and ransack public places like that.
Count me out. Enough is enough.
You are a traitor, Lindsey Graham.
Trump diehards turned on Senator Lindsey Graham after that.
Welcome to the new America, Lindsey. This is the rest of your life.
This video shows the first family Wednesday morning, right before the president's inflammatory speech.
I think we're T-minus a couple of seconds here, guys.
A couple hours later, the mob trampled the Constitution. And Roseanne Boyland of Kennesaw, Georgia.
The president's words incited a riot that killed 4 of his biggest fans.
Protesters also stormed the Washington State Governor's Mansion. More protests in Arizona, Florida, Minnesota, and the Kansas State House. Talk of more violence now scuttles across social media. Our American ideal is still at risk. Democracy or ochlocracy. Rule by the mob. Mark Strassmann, CBS News, Atlanta.
And we're joined now by our resident presidential historian, John Dickerson. Good morning. Thank you for coming in.
Good morning, Margaret. Great to be with you.
You know, it was just 2 weeks ago, Gallup poll said that Donald Trump was the most popular man in America. And now we're talking about calls for his resignation, inciting an insurrection. I mean, does all of this end when he leaves office?
You know, the president's son and son-in-law said that it's no longer the Republican Party, it's Donald Trump's party. So I think of your question in 2 ways. What happens to Donald Trump and what happens to the political market he created that future Republican politicians are going to try to appeal to? After the election, the president said the election was stolen. Republican lawmakers knew that was a lie. They knew there was a cost to that lie. But because of the political market Donald Trump had created, what Donald Trump said was true, and those lawmakers worried about blowback. So instead of a healthy political market where facts, reason, and tradition operate, this was a market where facts were whatever you wanted to be. Persuasion didn't matter. Demonization mattered. So that fills up a rally crowd, right? Politically, it cost Republicans the presidency, the House, and the Senate. Governing-wise, the founders told us this was a terrible way to work, where you have the standard for the presidency to be just what the rally crowd likes. The standard should be the one Mitt Romney said, which is sometimes you honor your voters by telling them the truth. So what standard survives? Is there reflection about the choices that were made? Does somebody stand up now against lies? Or does the market that Donald Trump created exist? And if that's the case, then this insurrection was just an inconvenience. And that market exists, and Donald Trump will have a big role in that in the future.
There's still fear of that market.
Absolute fear. Absolute, even after, I mean, perhaps even more, given what happened on the 6th of January.
Well, right, because Republicans have seen the muscles that can be flexed.
Exactly.
When it comes to, I mean, some of the extraordinary things we heard and we saw this week, you know, the president has, yes, he told people to go home, but then he said, we love you. You're patriots. He has not come out and said anything about the chance calling for his vice president to be executed, John.
You're exactly right, Margaret. This, to me, there are a lot of ways in which the president contributed to what happened on the 6th. But the example of what he was willing to trample in order to get his way is clearest in the grotesque treatment of his vice president. He says loyalty is the most important thing. No one has been more loyal to this president than Mike Pence. He has wagered his entire reputation defending the president. How was he repaid? The president said he could stop the count in Congress. He knew that to be a lie. When Mike Pence didn't do that because he couldn't do it, the president said he lacked courage. He put a target on the back of his vice president, and what happened? As sure as night follows day, those rioters said, hang Mike Pence. Hang Mike Pence. What gave them the idea that Mike Pence had done anything worthy of a hanging? Well, the president of the United States told them that, the person to whom Mike Pence was loyal. That's pretty low.
And he tweeted blasting Mike Pence while the siege was happening. And yet, we haven't heard a separation from the president. I mean, how do you put the genie back in the bottle at this point?
I don't think you do put the genie back in the bottle, because that political market is still operating that I was talking about. People are still fearful. And, you know, we still have some number of days to go in which a lot of this free floating anger is still out there. The president's still saying the election was stolen. And that gives energy to that free floating anger.
All right. Well, he doesn't have a social media platform on which to propagate that now, which is why there's going to be so much more focus on if and when he finally speaks to us. We know he's planning a speech tomorrow and again Tuesday to make some public remarks. But I mean, it's hard to find any kind of silver lining at the end of this week. But there are those who, I certainly notice how diplomats that I follow are trying to explain this to the rest of the world as they watch our beacon of democracy look pretty dim this week. Have you found any hope here?
Well, when the U.S. Capitol is a crime scene, it's pretty hard to find hope. But hope is the power to be optimistic when times look desperate. And there was already a test of democracy before January 6th. It was to hold an election in the middle of a pandemic. And what happened? The country, Republicans and Democrats, turned out in record numbers. People stood in line, there was no violence, and the states changed all their voting procedures to accommodate this, and it succeeded. And they did recounts, and they were challenged. And those local officials did what is the central attribute of character. They did what they were supposed to do. They didn't do the easy or political thing. Pressure, pressure, pressure. They kept the faith. Then who else kept the faith? All the local officials in those states, then the courts. All of these challenges came. People with a political interest, nevertheless, did what their job told them to do, not what was politically expedient. The Department of Justice didn't go after the president's opponents as he would have liked them to do. The military kept their faith, not doing what the president would like them to do. And then Congress, after the grotesque experience on the 6th, nevertheless, got together, held the vote. It took place. There is hope that can be accessed. What we need is a leader who can grab that hope. The stage is ready for them. Somebody has to step up.
John Dickerson, thank you
for
your thoughts. Good to have you here. We'll be right back. In addition to the political turmoil in these final days of the Trump administration, vaccine distribution remains problematic. The CDC reports nearly 7 million first doses of the vaccine have been received. That's only 30% of the total distributed across the country. Meanwhile, infections continue to soar. Thursday was the deadliest day yet. Almost 4,200 people died from COVID-19. There have now been over 22 million cases and more than 372,000 are dead. We want to go now to former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He sits on the board of Pfizer and Illumina, a company that is working on sequencing some of the new virus variants. He joins us from Westport, Connecticut this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
There are more people in this country hospitalized with COVID now than during the spring and summer combined. How much are these new strains from the UK, from South Africa, contributing to this surge?
Probably not a lot right now. We don't know for sure because we're not doing sequencing at a big enough scale like the UK is to really detect these variants. We're looking for the UK variant right now, but the method that we're using to try to detect the UK variant wouldn't necessarily spot the South African variant. So right now we think the prevalence of the UK variant is about 0.2 to maybe 0.3% of infections, and that's based on data that Illumina has helped develop. With the South Africa variant, we don't think it's very prevalent here in the United States, but we could be missing more of those infections. So we don't think that these new variants right now are contributing to the surge of infection that we're seeing. We think this is a post-holiday bounce. But the bottom line is that we need a better system for detecting these things so we can have an adequate public health response.
And how resistant are they to current treatments?
Well, they appear more fit, meaning that they spread more easily, both of these variants. We've done some initial analysis with the UK variant, particularly with respect to the vaccines and the monoclonal antibodies, and the medical products that we have right now do appear to be effective against that UK variant. There's more concern around the South African variant because that variant has mutated the spike protein, the protein that's the target for our vaccines and our antibodies, in a way that could defeat at least the antibodies and perhaps make the vaccines less effective. We're going to have data on the vaccines in the next couple of weeks. Pfizer, the company I'm on the board of, is working on developing some of that data, so we'll have a better answer on that question. But it just goes to show you that these viruses are going to evolve. I mean, this virus has been running through the world, around the world, racing around the world, largely unchecked. It's been under some selective pressure with the widespread use, for example, of convalescent plasma. So it's inevitable that we're going to see these kinds of mutations in this virus. And this is probably going to be a constant struggle. We're going to have to update our vaccines and our antibody drugs and other therapeutics regularly to keep up with these new variants as they emerge.
The White House task force told some state governors this week that there may be a new American variant of this virus. Then the CDC said yesterday, basically, they're still trying to figure it out, and it could take weeks or months to identify. Is there something that is making this surge worse right now other than our own bad behavior?
Yeah. I don't think so, and the people I've spoken to don't think so. There is a variant in the U.S. that has become the predominant variant right now that's different than the original infection, but that's inevitable that you're going to see evolution in the strains that are circulating. There's no evidence to suggest that it's more fit, more transmissible, and we don't think this South African variant and the UK variant are very prevalent here right now. But the game has changed on the vaccine. To go back to the discussion you were having at the top of this hit, we really need to get this vaccine out more quickly because this is really our only tool, our only backstop against the spread of these new variants. If we can get a lot of people vaccinated quickly, we might be able to get enough protective immunity into the population that this stops spreading at the rate that it is. So we need to acknowledge that it's not working. We need to hit the reset and adopt a new strategy and trying to get that out to patients.
I mean, there's only 10 days left to the Trump administration, but they started to acknowledge that the federal plan has some problems because they told states to maybe broaden out who they make the vaccine available to. The president-elect now says he's going to do what you've been talking about, which is release all available supply as soon as he takes office. But does releasing supply solve the problem here if it's really about uptake?
Well, it's a distribution issue right now. It will be a supply issue in 2 or 3 weeks, maybe if they can get the distribution right. Right now, there's 40 million doses sitting on a shelf somewhere. So the feds say it's with the states say it's with the feds. It really doesn't matter to the patient who's not getting access to the injection. You have 40 million on the shelf. We have 50 million Americans above the age of 65. So we have supply to push it out to that population more aggressively. I think we need to take an all-of-the-above approach and push it out through different channels, including the big box stores, including federal sites that the Biden administration is talking about standing up. We need to try everything right now to create multiple distribution points. A lot of senior citizens aren't going to want to go to a stadium to get an inoculation. They're going to want to go to a pharmacy, a local pharmacy or a doctor's office. So we need to provide more opportunity for people to get vaccination where they're comfortable getting it. But we do need to get these out more aggressively. Right now, you're right, it's a distribution issue. It will become a supply issue once we get the logistics down right. And we don't have that right now. We aren't doing a good job getting this to patients.
Was the siege of the Capitol this week potentially a super spreader event?
Of course. I mean, there's going to be chains of transmission that come out of that kind of mass gathering, and the crowd wasn't adhering to what we know are good practices in terms of mask wearing and other things. And I think they deliberately eschewed those things. So, yeah, we're going to see chains of transmission come out of that kind of a gathering for sure.
We'll be watching it. Dr. Gottlieb, thank you for your time this morning. We'll be back in a moment. During this administration, there has been no shortage of historic yet excruciatingly painful events. But even the most seasoned Washington veteran journalists were shocked by the attack on the Capitol, incited by our own president. As we worked on putting this broadcast together, we knew there was one voice we had to hear from, Bob Schieffer. And he joins us to reflect on the end of a volatile 4 years. Bob?
Margaret, America has never experienced anything like the Trump presidency. It is ending as it began, in chaos, controversy, and confusion. He told us America was broken and only he could fix it. His reign mirrored his own chaotic life. He lurched from one crisis to another, from financial windfalls to bankruptcies, from tabloid scandals to audacious lies. He introduced us to a bizarre cast of characters, from porn stars to the crackpots and clowns who inhabit the dark fringes of American politics. Some, like Rudy Giuliani, seemed to melt before our eyes as his hair dye trickled down his cheek during a news conference. Most he touched were diminished by the experience. Others who sought power by riding the back of the tiger wound up inside. He played down the pandemic and found kind words for Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, but seemed determined to drive a wedge between America and our traditional allies. Yes, the stock market went up, but the nation's deficit and national debt ballooned to record levels. As we saw in those awful scenes unfolding in the Capitol, we came to understand that the man who had a manic desire for power had no real understanding of the power he possessed or what happens when it is misused. He will be gone soon, but he showed us America was not broken. He was.
Bob, thank you for sharing your thoughts. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you, Margaret.
We'll be right back. At the end of a tough week, we want to say thank you to the journalists who covered the historic and horrific events. And thank you to the first responders who rushed to protect them, lawmakers, and everyone at the Capitol. Thank you all for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.